Okay, I'm recording the lecture. I've shared my screen. If you can quickly give me a thumbs up if I've successfully shared. Can you see the screen? Thank you. Okay, so we're looking at lease agreement. We started off the semester looking at the general law of contracts. Then we spent some time looking at the contract of purchase and sale. For this week, we are looking at lease agreement. Lease agreement, what is a lease agreement? Lease agreement, an agreement whereby one person, the lessor, gives another person the use and enjoyment. A person called the lessee gets the use and enjoyment of a property in exchange for the payment. We learned that the important difference between purchase and sale and lease is that if you buy something, the intention is for you to keep it permanently. You buy something with the intention of becoming the factors at play. You only buy something if you want to own it. Otherwise, why are you it? If I can interrupt myself quickly on this note, something I picked up in some of the tests that I was marking. There was a question: does the purchaser, does the buyer always become the owner? And there were some students that said no, because they might be buying it in order to sell it to somebody else. Yes, but that is not a relevant answer, because even if Linnea buys something from Sebastian with the intention of selling it to Narisha, then that agreement between Linnea and Sebastian, Linnea buys it in order to become the owner. And then when she as owner can then sell it to Narisha, it doesn't skip over her. Sebastian isn't selling it to Narisha. Just watch out for that. But in any event, you buy something with the intention of the owner, whereas a lease agreement by its very nature is always temporary. Temporary, however, does not mean there has to be it can be an indefinite agreement, provided that the agreement has some provision how the agreement can be terminated by way of notice. Or it doesn't have to specify a date. It can terminate at the specified future event. Having said that, the fact that a lease agreement is always temporary does not mean that it cannot be renewed upon its expiry. If it was a specific date and you wish to continue with the agreement, the law provides methods to renew a lease agreement. Now there are two manners in which a lease agreement can be renewed. The first is known as a conditional relocation. So remember that terminology. That is an express agreement. So if you contact the landlord and asks, can I stay for another year? And the landlord says, yes, you can. You enter into a new agreement. That is known as an express agreement. Conventional relocation, an express agreement to renew an existing or lease that has expired. And at the renewal, it can have new terms, an increase in rent, a new way of giving notice, etc., etc. It is, in fact, a completely new agreement. If, however, you just stay in the property, so you simply, instead of moving out at the end of the lease, you just remain in the property, continue paying rent, and the landlord accepts this, doesn't tell you to vacate the premises, doesn't evict you, but accepts it and accepts your rent. That is an implied renewal of the lease agreement. It's called a tacit relocation. And it will be on the same terms as previously. So no rental increase, etc. Remember there the difference between and a tacit relocation. A provision in our law which is very unique to common law. Remember, the basis, the originating source of Namibian law is Roman Dutch common law. This provision is unique to common law. Many other jurisdictions don't have this provision. Is a provision known as hire goes before sale. We also sometimes use the Dutch phrase, huur gaat voor koop. Hire goes before sale. Now, the principle of hire goes before sale provides security of title, not security of title, security of tenancy, security of tenure to the lessee in the event of the lessor trying or not trying to selling the property before the expiry of the lease. What it means in essence is if you are renting a room in my house, or even if you are renting my entire house, and sell a house to build, and the new owner of the property will accordingly have to accept the lease agreement. You cannot be evicted by the new owner before the expiry of your lease. Obviously, your rental will then be going to the new owner. I don't get my house, but the new owner of the property needs to accept your tenancy in terms of your agreement. This does not apply in each and every instance. Only in the following instances. With regard to a long lease is a lease for a period of longer than 10 years. Now, you need to know something about long lease agreements. For a long so lease for a period of longer than 10 years can in the office of the registrar. It's actually called a notarial lease agreement. There's a specific document of the Republic, which is then submitted to the office of the registrar of deeds. It's filed there, and a note, an endorsement against the title deed of the property, indicating that a long lease agreement. Out here, I said it can be registered, and can is not the same as must. Silvered. When we start these, they can also be, there are no realities. The same. Just putting it in writing and registration is not required the value of a long lease. Lease for a period of 15, 20 hours valid. The property of, if the property is sold, or whether it's in writing or not, does affect its validity. The tenant and the original only makes a difference. The original owner sells the property. So if it has not been registered, if it's registered, let's bullet point this for you. If it is registered, it's enforced. Looking at the if it's registered the property for the owner for the entire duration of the so is sorry, practical implication of this is little into a lease agreement with Linnea for initially Linnea moves onto the farm, starts farming there, but and the lease is long agreement registers. After a couple of years, say 3 or 4 years, Linnea well, instead of she moves back to town, opens a hair salon, whatever. But she is still, remember, she's still paying the rent. It's not the property anymore. Of course, if she stops paying the rent, then that's a different scenario. Then she will be in breach of contract, physically occupying the property. Now, Larisha sells the farm to Ryan. The lease agreement, because it's registered, remains valid. After has taken ownership and whatever of the any time during the rest of the duration of the lease, Linnea can go back to the farm and say, sorry, Ryan, I've got a valid lease agreement. I'm going to come live now. But that's only if it was registered against the property. The reason behind that is that it was a note, an endorsement against the title deed of the property. When Brian buys the property from Larisha, he knows, he is informed that there is a lease agreement with Linnea. So it's not something that's hush-hush surprise behind his back. So he buys it with the risk the tenant, in terms of the lease agreement, can at some stage come back. If it is not registered, Richard was not informed, so he didn't know. There are two possible scenarios. Not registered and the buyer is not informed. If the tenant in opposition, so you're actually living on the property, in the property, when the sale takes place, then the lease will continue to exist for a period of 10 years. After the sale, 10 years since the commencement of
Mazanakuma has lost connectivity, and I also don't know if you guys noticed, but she was breaking up a bit. She just informed us on the WhatsApp group that she has lost connectivity. Ms. Anakum, you are on mute.
Oh my goodness. Okay, let's start again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm going to have to repeat this whole thing again now after I've rejoined. Sebastian has a lease agreement with Narisha for 20 years. It's not registered. After 9 years, but he's occupying the property. After 9 years, Narisha sells the farm to Ryan. Because Sebastian was occupying the property, he has the right to continue with the lease for the first 10 years of the lease agreement. Not 10 years since Ryan has bought the farm or from Ryan, but 10 years of the lease agreement. So if Narisha sold after 9 years, he has 1 year left that he can stay on the farm. That is if he was in occupation. If he was not in occupation, so he had a lease agreement, but he wasn't currently occupying the property. This one, sorry, just uh, let me just check my notes here. Sometimes I also get confused about how these things work. I suddenly confused myself. Okay. If he's not in occupation, the lease will terminate. If the buyer was informed, even if it's not registered, if the buyer was informed, the new owner knew of the long lease, the tenant can stay for the full duration. However, if the buyer, the successor in title, you can't call him a buyer actually in this instance, if the successor in title acquired the right to property um, gratuitously, So he didn't pay for it. He either inherited the property or was gifted the property. The lease he will be bound to release. So if it's property, if we're talking about the application of the hire goes before sale rule, long lease agreements, if it's registered, the entire duration of the lease. If the property was acquired gratuitously, also the full duration of the lease. If the buyer knew about the lease, even if it wasn't registered, full duration. If it was not registered and the buyer was not informed, so he just the day that he was due to that the property was transferred to him, he pitched up there and found out, but oh my goodness, there's a tenant here. Period of 10 years, if the tenant is in occupation for a period of 10 years. The tenant isn't on the farm, the lease will terminate. Might sound a little bit confusing initially, but if you look at it carefully, it isn't actually that confusing. Short lease agreements, when does hire go before sale apply? It's set out fairly straightforwardly. If the tenant is physically in occupation of the property, or if the new owner, the new successor in title, is aware of the lease agreement, or if the new owner acquired their title gratuitously. But if the tenant is not in occupation of the property, then the lease will terminate. Any questions? Okay, so today we've looked so far at how a lease agreement's renewed, instances where even if there's a change of ownership of the property, the lease will proceed. So the last thing we need to look at is termination of lease agreements. How do lease agreements come to an end? A lease agreement is a contract. So these, I don't need to discuss these with you in great detail because it's actually similar to how does a contract come to an end, termination of any other contract, not just specifically lease agreements. Inflection of time, if it was for a specific period of time, it will come to an end once that time period has expired. Termination by notice, many lease agreements have a provision whereby either party can give notice to the other party following specific procedure. Yeah, so that's basically it. How do lease agreements come to an end? Either by way of the passage of time or when notice has been given. Okay. Any questions? Thank you for joining me this morning, for making the time. I will upload. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.